Namaskar and good morning to all esteemed participants. It is an absolute delight to extend a warm welcome to each one of you on the second day of 18th Sustainability Summit. The delegates can access all summit-related information by scanning the QR code provided on their summit notepads and the badges. We will now begin the session on women-led development. It is my privilege to welcome to all the panel members and moderator of the session to the dais. I request the moderator, Mr. Tristan Ace, Chief Program Officer, Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, to initiate the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome once again to day 2 of the Sustainability Summit. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I'm with an organization called AVPN, which is Asia's largest social investor network. We have a community of over 600 capital providers globally that all have an interest in deploying capital specifically to the Asia-Pacific region. We've been delighted to really work with CII over the last year or so and to be here today to moderate this really important conversation around women-led development. Before I introduce my panelists here, I just wanted to check we're all awake, first of all, and to get us moving a bit as well. So I've got a few questions to kick us off this morning's session. So the first one is, I'm going to invite you to stand up if you have a woman working in your organization. Hopefully everybody should stand up. Okay, good. Just checking you're all awake. Okay, so now stay standing. Stay standing if more than half, so more than 50% of the people in your organization are women. Stay standing. Okay, not bad, not bad. Okay, my next question is, stay standing if somebody in your senior leadership team is a woman. Stay standing. Okay, good. Okay, so now stay standing if the CEO of your organization is a woman. Okay. Okay, final question. Stay standing if there's somebody who's on your governance structure, your board, who is a woman. Okay, so people are standing up again. Okay, brilliant. So thank you. It's great to see you all awake. So some interesting reflections. I'll be interested to see what our panelists think here, whether they think this is a good, whether they would say this is good representation, mediocre representation, whether there's work to be done. But overall, I think it's not bad, and it's perhaps not surprising that we see this in a conference that has a dedicated focus on sustainability, to see perhaps better gender equality than we would in other areas of life. So that's I think a good start to our conversation today. Brilliant. So gender equality is central to the work that AVPN does, and last year we were really delighted to have worked with the G20 presidency in Indonesia, where we made 3 commitments in Bali at the Leaders Summit. The first was the announcement of a $25 million gender equality pooled fund, and we subsequently deployed, since Bali, about $3 million to supporting organizations focusing on women's economic empowerment right across the Asia-Pacific region. We also launched a task force dedicated to women-led MSMEs and to the challenges they face in raising capital, in digital transformation, and in digital transformation, and looking at the issues associated with adapting to the impacts of climate change. That report is out, and we are circulating those findings with a number of engagement groups around the G20 this year in India. So please do get in touch if you'd like to read the report or learn more about the findings. And then finally, we also launched a new initiative which focused on how to mainstream gender considerations across all of your giving and investing. So across all of our 600 members, whether or not you're focused explicitly on gender, we want you to think about how you would look at the issues that affect women and girls across all of your portfolio. And that program launched too recently, the Principles of Gender Lens Giving. So those are the three things that we did last year, and we're delighted to see some of the impacts of them here this year at the G20 in India as well. And then most recently, our work, which was really accelerated this year on the care economy, has taken center stage, I think. And we were delighted with our work recently at the G20 Empower Summit, which took place a few weeks back, where we shared our knowledge paper on the care economy and made recommendations around how to ensure that the idea of care and the care economy more broadly is fully represented and fully accounted for as part of our broader economic development. So moving to today's session, I have three wonderful panelists here with me. I think we have one dialing in online. I'm not sure if that's happening or not. But if not, we will stick to our three panelists here. We'll have more time with them here to focus on this issue. I will also be coming to the audience for questions. And again, with my questions, I want to ensure there is gender equality. So I'm not going to be I'm going to be making sure we get full representations in the way that we run the session as well. So please think about your questions that you'd like to ask our panelists, and be prepared when I come to you to take them. I'm now just going to take a seat, and I'm going to introduce our panelists to kick off the session this morning. So to my far left, I have Kathy Roussel, who is Head of Advocacy and Engagement at Amfori, which is the Business Association for Sustainable Trade and Procurement across 40 countries globally. To Kathy's right, we have Miss Susan Ferguson, who is the country representative for UN Women and has a long and illustrious career, which I'll let her talk a little bit about in the context of our conversation today. And then to my left, we have Mr. Anuj Agarwal, who is the CEO of the CII-ITC Foundation for Inclusive Growth. So I'm going to kick off with a broad question to begin with, which is really, and we're also joined by Suzanne Pulvera virtually, who I think has just joined us online. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you so much.
And Suzanne is the CEO and CSO of IKEA India. So welcome to you all. I'm going to kick off then with the first more broad question to get the conversation going, which is really to start off by telling us a little bit about the work that you are doing, and then secondly, tell us why the agenda of women-led development is so critical in the context of G20. So two questions to kick off, and perhaps I can start with you, Susan, if I may.
Thank you very much, Tristan, and thank you very much, everyone, for having me here today. It's a great pleasure to be here also with these panelists. So UN Women, it's the only UN agency that focuses specifically on women and the needs of women and girls. We're a young organisation in the UN, so about 12 years old, and we're quite small compared to some of our large sister agencies like UNICEF or UNDP, for example. But we do critical work, and I think we achieve much more than our size. So we focus on women's economic empowerment, we focus on ending violence against women and girls, and we focus on women's leadership and agency, and on what we call gender-responsive governance, so working with governments around financing, for example. So, and really, I just wanted to just say a few words about women's leadership and why we think it's so important. It's one of our critical areas of work across the world. And that's basically because the case is so clear that women need to be able to exercise their decision-making ability to achieve their sustainable development goals, for all of us to achieve the sustainable development goals. For too long, women have been seen as a small minority of needy people that need some, a hand up into being able to sit at these tables. but we don't see women in that way. You know, women are 50% of the population, and if you add girls into it, it's a lot more. And you know, it's really crucial that women are a part of the economic equation and development in general. So actually years ago in India, one of the first really significant studies about the impact of women's leadership occurred at local level when panchayats suddenly had to include women in their panchayats. So it was the first time women in numbers came into governance. And it was shown really clearly through really exhaustive research that having women making decisions at local level improved development outcomes for everyone. There were more investments in social infrastructure like schools and health centres, and this flowed on to improving girls' lives overall. There was also more financing for women's interests because women had a seat at the table. So on that level, it was proved that women are important to promote development for all. Secondly, we know that women in decision-making in the private sector, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about this, and I know that IKEA, for instance, has done an amazing job in this, increases both innovations in the private sector and it also increases profit. So there is really clear evidence about this. So sometimes I think, why are we even debating this? Unlocking women's agency will improve their lives, our lives, and everyone's lives. Lastly, I just wanted to say one thing about social norms, and that one reason that we are still sitting around the tables talking about this is that we don't yet fully understand and realise this in reality, I think. We still hold a lot of invisible social norms about the role that women should play, that women don't make as good leaders as men, for example, or that women's time at home should be spent primarily as the caregivers rather than sharing that with men. So these social norms continue to hold women back, along with the issue of violence. And sexual harassment at work, for example, is a huge issue and one reason why women often don't make it to the top, for example. So all of these areas are linked, and I'm glad that we have a chance here today to talk more about the linkages of these things and the impact of women's leadership. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Susan. So I'm going to come to Suzanne, who is online now. So it's clear that the evidence is there, but there's still a huge amount to do in terms of social norms. So Suzanne, perhaps I can come to you now, and particularly building on what we heard just now, to talk about your journey as a women leader in the private sector, in the retail sector particularly, and how you have managed to navigate those social norms and succeeded to achieve the leadership role that you have. Perhaps we can hear a little bit about that story first of all, and then obviously it'd be great to hear a little bit about the work that you're doing to promote women-led development as well. So perhaps I can come to you now.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I would have loved to be with you, but I'm in Bangalore and could only join virtually. But I'm with you fully with my heart because this is an extremely important topic for IKEA. So I started in IKEA 26 years back. I started in the head office, which was quite uncommon back then to start there as the first job. And when I got to see the list of the top 200 managers, there were only 6 women, and I was one of them. I was a bit shocked. This is 97 we speak. And I, of course, felt how it is to be a minority in the company. And I felt that sometimes I was fairly young also, that it was not easy to be a woman. But it didn't take long until we had a second CEO who really took diversity to his heart. And he started the movement internally in the beginning of 2000. And since then, it has been in our focus and the priority, and it still continues to be, and the diversity agenda is expanding. So today, when I look, we are 50-50. We are gender diverse throughout. And if I look at my peers who are now country managers, there are more women than men. In my management team, 10 people, we are 60% women and 40% men. Then we cannot relax. We still need to continue. So to keep an eye on what are the numbers telling us, and then course correct when we recruit. And it's so clear that this is the only way forward. There are so many studies who point out that diversity gives result in business, besides that it's a human right. And it's a loss of competence and resources not to include women. So when we came to India, which is around 10 years back, and started to prepare for the retail market, we had a very strong country manager, Cuvencio, and an HR manager to put as a top priority to commit to 50-50 gender diversity. Everyone said it's not possible, you should go a bit lower, but they were very committed. It's the only right target. And since then, they have been pushing this, and the successor, and now I'm the third country manager for IKEA India Retail, and we are gender diverse throughout. We have a little bit work to do on manager. We are 45-55, so we cannot relax, as I say, but of course it's natural for us, but we know it's not natural all throughout the society in India. And we see it as our mission to actually influence and try to spread the benefits and the need for women to be included. And we see it so clearly in our business that it's not a discussion today. That is, then I think it's still, depending on where you are, a need to make the space safe, make it women friendly, have the policies that support women, etc. So that is still work that we need to do, the business needs to do, and the government and NGOs needs to support. So all together to really come from 25% of women in the workforce to a gender diverse India. So I see it as a very big task we all have to drive this movement.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Suzanne. So we've heard the case for women's for gender equality, both the business and economic case, as well as the fundamental human rights case as well for it. We've also heard a story about a corporate that has done a great amount to try to drive gender equality within the organization. So coming to you, Kathy, now leading advocacy and engagement at an association, which I imagine where you see many businesses globally. Perhaps you can talk about what you're seeing. Well, first we'll talk a little bit about your work and your journey, but also what you're seeing amongst the businesses in your organization, and how through procurement you can start driving gender equality across the association you work with.
Sure. So maybe first, let me say that I'm super happy to be here with you guys today. I think it's a great way to start the day to speak about such an important topic. I'm even more happy to be in India, because India is one of is a major sourcing country for our members. We are lucky, we are pretty active on that market. We have a country network rep that is sitting on that table over there with a nice green sari, supporting our efforts. So it's really a country that is close to our heart. Maybe a few words about Amphori. We are indeed a business association. We have 2,500 members coming from different geographies, coming in different sizes, covering different sectors. And what brings them together is their conviction that trade can be carried out in a sustainable manner. So to respond to that conviction, we support them with some tools to enable them to really increase the ESG performance of their supply chain. And these tools are aligned with widely recognized international standards on sustainability and responsible business conduct. I'm going to name like UNGPs, OECD guidelines, and all these international standards basically acknowledge the importance of promoting gender equality in supply chains and applying a gender lens to business activities. So about the case for women empowerment, I think it's pretty straightforward. I was really happy to see that when you ask all these questions, pretty proud to be able to stand until the very last of your questions. So we really walk the talk within our organization. That being said, there is still some work to be done with our members and with their business partners. That's where what we are working on. And it's been said by both Suzanne. I think maybe in the business community, the conversations about gender tend to be approached through two main angles. So we think about gender because it's a legislative or policy requirement. That's one way to approach it. Or some others will look at it because it's felt as a moral imperative, right? But there is still within the business community too little conversations that are highlighting the business case for women empowerment. And as Susan highlighted earlier, there are many studies that come with facts demonstrating the benefits of women empowerment, and not only moral benefit, but also the economic benefit of working on this. So to me, that's, okay, moral imperative, of course, legislative push, of course, but even more important for business is that this business case. So we need to speak more about this because somehow it's still not there enough in the conversation. And I believe that from the moment business really understand that it actually can be good for the business, well, they will start moving even more on this topic and take it even more seriously.
Okay, so we have heard that there's a series of drivers. First of all, there are policy drivers. There's also a moral set of drivers. But the set of drivers which perhaps is not as well communicated is the business or the economic case for women-led development or gender equality in business. And we've also heard about the gap between the sort of existing social norms and where we want to get to, which is still hindering this progress. So I think it's a fantastic way to frame our conversation this morning. So perhaps, Anuj, I can come to you now and ask you to talk about the work that you're doing with ICI Foundation for Inclusive Growth here in India.
Yeah, thanks, Tristan. Thank you, CII, for inviting me. I have the privilege of speaking last, being the only male member in this panel on women-led development. I represent ICI Foundation for Inclusive Growth, and as the name of the organization suggests, we work towards inclusive growth. So we actually undertake social and development projects on behalf of ICICI Bank and its group companies, implementing projects directly through our team on the ground across all 36 states and union territories. So while ICICI as a group has a long legacy of over 7 decades working for the social and development sector of the country, we actually work in a very focused manner in terms of working for the benefit of the society and the communities and undertaking projects in a very, very sustainable manner. Why is this a need in this country? I'm so glad that we are discussing this here in the context of India. India, of course, has been, showing very impressive growth over the last decade or so. But, in this growth story of our country, what is also there is that, we see concentration of growth. Somewhere there is a need that we need to have distributed growth, we need to have inclusive growth, and that is what will lead to a sustainable growth of our country. Now, when I say concentration in growth, I mean concentration is in terms of sectors. It's not that all sectors are, propelling growth in an equitable manner. There is concentration in geographies. So when we say geographies, it's the metros and the urban areas which is primarily driving the growth. It is not really there in as much in smaller towns and rural areas. It's also concentration in gender. The topic that we are discussing today, that how much do we see participation from, across genders in terms of ensuring that, it's a uniform growth. I mean, just taking that discussion forward, if you look at it, 2/3 of our country actually lives in the rural part. Most of them are actually in the profession of agriculture or an allied activity. Now, if 2/3 of our country's population is actually engaged in a particular sector, what percentage of the GDP should that represent? I mean, it's a very fundamental question that one would ask. And, what we find is that, agriculture as a sector contributing to our economy is less than 20%. So it's less than one-fifth, whereas over 2/3 of the population is actually engaged in that profession. And, even if it is less than 20%, what is the annual growth rate of agriculture as a sector? Again, that is much below, what the annual growth rate of our GDP is. So, while we are, one of the top 5, largest economies of the world, we are aiming to be the 3rd largest economy very soon. But what is important is that we need to focus on creating inclusive growth, and, women have to be definitely a very, very active part of that growth. And what we know is that the capability of women, because when we work in this sector and we want to encourage inclusive growth, about 500,000 would be the population of women that have directly got engaged with us in terms of skill building and then sustainable livelihood, whether it is in the urban areas or in the rural areas. A large number of these are actually in the rural areas, where we engage them, beyond their normal household activities into a regular profession or a livelihood. What we see is that, it is not only helping the families in terms of enhancing their incomes, but what is happening is that the empowerment that these women are now able to carry is something which is very, very significant. When you interact with some of these women, the feeling of pride that you see in their faces. I mean, the single word that they talk about is the respect that they are able to command in the family. And when you ask them to elaborate, what do you mean by respect? What they say is, now we are an equal part of decision making in the family. I mean, it creates a substantial change in the way they live and the way they are contributing to their families and eventually, to the economy of that town and then to the country. So it's a very important subject, and I think we are making progress in that. But what is required, I mean, as a need of the hour, is to work more. More and more people have to realize this. More and more people have to, contribute in this direction, so that the growth that our country will see will be much more sustainable in the long run.
Okay, thanks for that, Anuj. So we hear about the challenge of, although we've seen such rapid economic growth, we see that growth concentrated. And I like the way you frame that, concentrated in geography, sectors, but also when it comes to gender, so concentrated amongst men, essentially. And then that statistic around 2/3 of the population working in rural parts or in agricultural sector, and of course, of those 2/3, a disproportionate higher number will be women, contributing just 20% to GDP. So how do you think about economic growth that is more inclusive going forward? Okay, brilliant. So we've had a really fantastic way to set the frame for our conversation today. I'm going to ask one more question in a moment, but I want to just prep the audience, because after that, I'm going to come to you and invite you to share some of your questions for our panelists as well. So this year, we've seen under the G20 Empower program, really women-led development being a priority for the G20 presidency, led by the Honourable Minister Smriti Irani. And we've seen a few different areas that have been focused on. The first one I mentioned before was around the importance of the care economy, recognizing unpaid care work and its impact on female labor force participation. And we're very excited for some work that we're doing in that agenda, which we can perhaps talk a little bit more about later today. We've also talked about the importance of supporting women-led MSMEs. And we've seen some great regulations, some great leadership by the Indian government in that regard as well. And of course, I mentioned before, the AVPN report that we're publishing, the preliminary findings of this week, looking at recommendations to support women-led MSMEs across the APAC region. We've also looked at, heard the focus on empowering women to be part of governance at local and community level. And we've also saw the launch recently of the Tech Equity platform, which focused on digital inclusion. So we've seen some really important leadership shown this year under the presidency of India and the G20. So I'd love our panelists perhaps just to reflect on what they've seen and also some of the work that they're doing. Perhaps Susan, I can come to you. So some of the work that you're doing to really promote this agenda in the G20, and also what your reflections are of some of the things you've seen this year in India as well.
Thanks, Tristan. Well, firstly, I think that the Indian government has done an amazing job of raising the issue and the importance of women's leadership across all of the working groups and the engagement groups of G20. I mean, we, at the start of G20, within UN Women, we did a kind of a review of what G20 has done to date on women's empowerment, and there have been some really important steps over the years. But I really think that the Indian government has taken it to another level entirely. And I think, I know that the draft communique has got many really important things still in that on gender equality. When our Deputy Executive Director came about a year ago and met with the Indian government about G20, and her key kind of engagement was on, can you make sure that gender stays in and gets in to the communique? You know, no matter what happens, it needs to be in that final document. I think the Indian government has done an amazing job of that too. And I think one of the really, really outstanding things that states have agreed to is to have a gender working group rather than an engagement group for which the focus specifically on women has been at the engagement group level. I think a working group will bring a whole lot of additional importance and focus from heads of state of the 20 largest economies in the world. So I think that's phenomenal. And I think through the leadership of W20 and G20 Empower and the Ministry for Women, I think that this focus on women-led development from the grassroots upwards has been really key, along with, as you said, some of the initiatives that have been launched by G20 Empower, for instance, and that's the Tech Equity sort of platform, plus mentoring for women in businesses. And recently, I was really thrilled that we were able to launch with G20 Empower a Care Accelerator, because, as you said, the issue of care work and the inhibiting factor that has on women's economic empowerment has really bubbled up through many of the different meetings that have occurred this year. And our accelerator, which we're hoping to work with AVPN on, is really a call for funds and investment from the private sector to be able to bring up and mentor and get innovative women-owned businesses to develop solutions, economic solutions and business solutions to this issue of care. So, I mean, they're just some of the things I think have been really, really important.
Great, thanks for that, Susan. So some really exciting initiatives, I think, that are being launched this year and going beyond just words to actually practical actions and initiatives. And we are very excited to be collaborating potentially on this Care Accelerator going forward as well. So Suzanne, I'm going to come to you online now. And I'd love to hear perhaps framing what you're seeing in the broader context here in India with the Indian presidency of G20 in the context of the work that IKEA has done to promote gender equality and women's empowerment, both within your own workforce, but also within your supply chains? What are you seeing, and what have you done to try to promote this agenda?
Yeah, I'm really happy that this is such a big focus for the G20 and to have framed a women-led development. I think we all, as I said, need to work together, business, government, NGOs, organizations, and of course, every person has a responsibility to take this on. So I think policies will help us, and business can make a big difference by really acting on the opportunities we have to work towards gender diversity in our own organizations and show the benefit. And I think we are active in a community of the Swedish Chamber with a lot of other Swedish companies, and that is helping us to drive the agenda together. So I think to spread awareness and to actually show by good example, all of us, where we are acting, that we create a gender diverse organization. And when you see the benefits and the masses are getting there, I think we will see a much bigger movement. Then I think on the groups that are more vulnerable, we talked about how to promote the care economy, the SMEs that are led entrepreneurship by women. Here, I think we need to put an extra focus, and we are trying as a business to support women entrepreneurs. Socially, we have artisans that we work with and creating range that we can sell in our stores. And I think we can do more of that altogether to support the more vulnerable groups of women as well, to be inclusive fully. So it's the whole spectrum, yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Suzanne. Perhaps I can come to you, Kathy, with a similar question really around what you're seeing in terms of the major initiatives that you're doing within your association, but also how you are engaging with platforms like G20 to try to promote gender equality across supply chains.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe let's start with how we engage on the B20 discussions around that topic. So yes, there was a dedicated group, but I think it's important that in every discussion, in every single working group, that we apply gender lens when we have these discussions, because it cannot be a separate discussions that is taking place apart from the rest of the discussions and then doesn't seem to be relevant. It needs to be infused in every single working group discussions that the B20 have. And this is something that we try to do ourselves. One of the things we push for in some of this group was about the importance of gender responsive procurement. Because I think it was discussed yesterday in one of the panels, but sometimes, or not sometimes, pretty often, even when women manage to have, that own business, they manage to have loans, which can be complicated sometimes, they still struggle to gain access to procurement opportunities from big brands, because we were discussing earlier, because they don't have the network, they don't have the information. But there is also a very striking number. So if you look at the situation globally, worldwide, 30% of businesses are owned by women. They still access to only 1% of major procurement opportunities. That's a huge discrepancy. These numbers are really striking. This is why it's very clear to me that gender responsive procurement is key if we are to achieve any real, concrete, tangible change. So there need to be quite some efforts put into that. And within our association and with our members, we've been working also raising awareness about the importance of gender responsive procurement. We've been doing that through basically through capacity building activities, because they can have really a strong impact. So the gender responsive procurement program that we launched together with UN Women and We Connect International It's about really highlighting the business case for gender responsible procurement, but also offering the participants very concrete ways to implement this, so that they know where they're starting from, they know, they define their own objective, they build an action plan, and then they are really able to understand how to implement gender responsive procurement in their business activities. And we've seen in the training that we had, I think it was this year, that 70% of the participants said they had like new opportunities after this training because they were seeing things different ways. So that's pretty good results. But that being said, there is still a lot of work to be done there. Also what we are witnessing is that there are some businesses, and a reasonable number of them, that are, yes, keen to advance this agenda, but there are also businesses that approach gender issues as if it was a tick-the-box exercise, without making the structural changes that are needed to really address the inequalities. So yes, there is more work to be done. We are very aware of that, so we will continue working on this and pushing this topic, which is very, very important to us. It will require persistence, it will require dedication, so there is no end date to this effort. It's all about continuous improvement, and although it might sound like it's a drop in the ocean, still it's a baby step, but like a real step that will drive scalable change on the ground.
Okay, so it has to be more than a tick box exercise. It's all very well having the policies in place, but you actually need to follow through on the implementation. Anuj, so Kathy is working with many of her members to help them to implement gender-sensitive procurement policies. I know that ICII works directly with many MSMEs on the ground in India. Some of our findings from our recent report highlighted some of the major barriers that particularly small micro businesses face across the APAC region, including challenges around informality, access to capital, and obviously access to markets as well. So perhaps I can come to you now to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing on the demand side to help these companies access capital, access markets as well.
Yeah, so, I will talk about what we do at ICICI Foundation, and this is a work which is absolutely at the grassroots level, working towards, inclusive growth and creating distributed growth, as I mentioned earlier. So, we look at this in two parts. One, how do we engage women as a part of being the change? And the second part is, how does, the women actually become a catalyst to carry out that change? So these are two different things, and, we have to work with a different strategy on both these aspects. Of course, there are a lot of challenges on the ground. There are social norms, there are, resistance to change. There are so many other challenges which one has to face, but that's a part of the job in terms of dealing with those challenges and mobilizing, the village population, both the male and as well as the female genders, to ensure that there is alignment in the thought process to carry forward. One of the first things to begin with, of course, is financial literacy. This is one big gap which exists in our country. Not enough has been done. Of course, financial inclusion through the Jan Dhan accounts that happened a few years back has been a remarkable journey as far as the country is concerned. It has propelled our country into a completely different league, and the kind of growth that it is able to bring about, and the kind of benefit that the population on the ground is now able to experience is something which is truly remarkable and genuinely very good. What we continue to work in that is, bring about financial literacy, because having an account is a good start, but you also need to know what you can do with money and how you need to deal with it. The second part, of course, is, the self-help groups, which are women-led self-help groups, or farmer-producer organization, or other farmer groups which exists in the rural locations, they are kind of micro entrepreneurs, in their own way. Now, creating a group is one part, making financial contribution is another part, but how do you ensure that, the group can sustain financially and carry out a business or an enterprise which continues to make profit and continues to show growth is again an area which has to be looked upon very, very carefully. And that is where, organization like ours actually play a important role. So one is, financial literacy at an individual level. Two is bringing financial capability at a group level or a micro enterprise level to make sure that they take the right steps and actually also, move forward as an enterprise to be able to have sustainable activity in future. So these are different areas, and you cannot have a cookie cutter approach across locations. When you're working, in all the 36 states and union territories, there are vagaries and different kind of situations. Even social norms differ from maybe one block to another block. So you really have to get into the community. You have to speak to them and understand from them. When we talk to some of our colleagues or team members who are actually working with the community, they tell us some very, very interesting stories of how they were able to counsel and motivate the ladies over there in terms of undertaking that activity. And it's a slow process, but the good news is that once the change begins to happen, then acceleration is very, very quick. So one has to create solutions. I mean, even for example, if you look at a fundamental or a very basic livelihood, which is a goatry, goat rearing livelihood, which most of the landless population of our country undertakes, engaging women in making sure that goat rearing as a profession can multiply is a huge thing. But how do you sustain it? Creating women leaders over there who, what are often called as Pashu Sakhis, who ensure that, the nutrition of the goat population across that village is the right, they are having, the right nutrients, the vaccination of the goats is being done on time. If there is, some health issue with the goat, how does that health issue get addressed? What are the market linkages being created for selling of those goats? Are the goats being sold on a unit basis or on a weight basis? So motivating the population over there to make sure that they are able to maximize the revenue when they are selling the goats. So these are different activities that happen on the ground, and it has to be dealt with in a systematic manner. So creating the right structure of being a part of the change as well as driving that change is something that we focus on, and accordingly we structure things on the ground.
Okay, thanks, Anuj. So, I think the example of the access to financial services, particularly bank accounts, is a fantastic one, and I think that was recognized in the UN report that was published earlier this week as an area where India has made significant progress. Also, what I liked about what you said was the idea that although it takes a long time to get things moving, once they are moving, change can happen, the acceleration can happen very quickly. And then, of course, the importance of listening and engaging with communities as well. So some practical examples of how we can actually implement this in practice as well. So I'd love to come to the audience now for some questions. I see a hand here. But I'm going to take a few questions so we can get a sense of what the audience is thinking and feeling at this point. So I've got two just here. I'll start with the lady next to you, and then I'll come to the gentleman just next to her here, if I may. And then please do ask any other questions at this point as well.
Hi, I'm Anuja, and thank you for an insightful discussion which is beyond relevant in today's time. My question to the panel is that if I were to ask you, and we know we have made various strides as far as women empowerment is concerned, and with specific to our country, India, what would be the one critical area, as per your understanding and discussion, which is most essential and a must-have and a necessity for ensuring women-led development and bringing more women leaders at the forefront? If you were to pick one critical area. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that one. The gentleman, I'll ask you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Rahul Banerjee. I'm the managing director at Rice and House. We're a policy research think tank with the Ministry of External Affairs. The problem we as policy planners face is the dilemma between the data we receive and the reality on ground, right? Mr. Agarwal, you said that access to bank accounts has promoted financial inclusivity, but has it really happened? We do not take into considerations how these access to bank account has still not enabled women's participation and access to savings and credits in most rural areas, right? We also do not take into account who uses the money. Is it really the women who's using the money for their own empowerment, or is it the husband who takes away the money? How do you address this dilemma?
Okay, thank you for that question. Are there any other reflections or questions from the audience? We've got two to kick us off with. One just here. And in order to balance it out, I'll need another woman to ask a question. Ask this gentleman before I come back. So I'd love to have another voice from the floor.
Yeah, morning. This is not India specific. This is more to do with especially the Middle East sector and the African segment. The question is, while India can definitely claim some of the game changers which has helped achieve good amount of progress in women empowerment, what are some of the game changers as a G20 that you would like to look at and propose across the Middle East, where the situation is far from different than what we are seeing in India today, and including the entire African continent, excluding perhaps South Africa?
Thank you for that question. Okay, going once, going twice, the last chance. Okay, we'll kick off with those three questions then. Susan, we'll come to you. There's the first one, and I'm conscious of time as well. We've got about 8 minutes left. So what I might ask you also to do is to, and this actually is very aligned, I think, with the last question a little bit, which is really around what you would like the legacy of G20 India to be. If you were to think 5 years from now, and there's something that you said or launched today or at the Leaders Summit in a few weeks' time that has actually happened, is implemented, and we're really seeing that change, what would that be? So that's a question from me as well, but then we'll start off with the first three questions. So first of all, what is the critical area that is most essential to really driving forward women's empowerment? The second question is, okay, we've got a lot of these nice headlines, I think, but perhaps we need to dig a bit deeper to see the data, to see whether change is really happening in society. And I think this speaks to the question of, are these just tick box exercises as well? So second question around data, and indeed in our own report, we found that data was one of the critical barriers, the lack of data was one of the critical barriers to women-led businesses accessing capital and accessing other resources as well. And then finally, a question around, which goes beyond India, to really think about other places in the world that perhaps where less progress has been made. We talked about the Middle East and potential parts of sub-Saharan Africa as well. So what can G20 be doing to really mobilize and to mobilize change in other parts of the world as well? And what, I suppose in that context, what leadership role India can be playing in that regard? So lots to unpick there, Susan. I won't invite you to try and cover all of it, but perhaps pick a few issues that stood out for you.
Thank you. So the one thing that will make a difference for women, I think that's an impossible question because there is no one thing. Unfortunately, I think we all would love it if there was one thing, but because the discrimination is multi-dimensional, it's impossible just to have one solution to it. That said, obviously education for girls is game-changing. And I think that one of the things I think that would really unlock women's empowerment across a number of dimensions is this issue of financing for gender equality. You know, I think we always think that, well, why aren't women doing the same as men or having the same opportunities as men? And, you know, it's often because there's no investment in issues that, like I mentioned before, care. It's really only in the last, I would say really only the last year that care has been discussed in such a way. And again, I think that's one of the things that the Indian presidency has really sort of brought to the fore. And so without investment, it's the same as any kind of business. If you don't have any investment, you can only grow to a certain amount. So we need both public and private sector investment in women's needs and their particular interests. So that's what I would say on that. And then I think that with what I really appreciated your interventions, Anuj, because you really brought to the fore again that there are so many different kinds of women. You know, there's women who are really vulnerable. I said at the beginning that, you know, I'm sick of thinking of women as a vulnerable group only. I'm not sick of thinking of women as a group. There are vulnerable women and there are many vulnerable women. And this issue of do these interventions really make a difference, I think is mixed again, because our work, we work with women on grassroots around second chance education, skilling, and digital literacy. And we've seen that a number of the initiatives are making a huge difference, but there is also a gap of women who aren't yet using those bank accounts and need more support to do that. But what I would say is that it's a staged process. It's like gender equality in the law. You know, you have to have laws against violence against women, but it takes time to implement those laws. So it's critical to have this government investment on, you know, banking women, but there is still a process of making the most of those laws and those policies and those development changes. And then on what do we want to see globally and the legacy globally, I think that apart from this, you know, an ongoing working group focusing on women's issues, I think, I mean, we in UN Women, we've been thinking a lot about this, and around the care economy, if countries, we know that if countries invested up to 2% of their GDP in care, that's childcare, elder care and others, caring for people with disabilities, 2% would enable universal coverage for care. So if governments could commit 2% of their GDP to care, I think that would be a game changer also. And I think there are commitments, you know, 25 by 25, which is 25% of women's leadership within the private sector by 2025, is an existing G20 commitment. We think that should be raised significantly, you know. It looks like G20 countries will meet that target. You know, we should be more ambitious in our targets, I think. And also we should be looking at, you know, we think also that governments could spend, you know, and track allocation of, you know, 25% of their money spent directly on women's issues and ensuring that women have equal opportunities to men. So it's allocating and it's also tracking that through gender responsive budgeting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Susan. Anuj, I'm going to come to you next. I'm going to invite you to reflect on some of these questions that the audience have asked.
Yeah, I'll in a way respond directly to the question asked by the gentleman there. Of course, it's a valid query. You know, in a given situation, you know, one has to look at it in two ways. One is the objective side of it, the other is the subjective side of it. On the objective side, yes, you know, it is the data. You know, you analyze the data, you see what are the trends in the data. I think the data is, of course, clearly showing, you know, how these accounts are helping, how they are creating empowerment over there, and the number of transactions. I mean, you know, the way digital banking has grown in our country in the last couple of years is something which is amazing. And, you know, the country as such is creating some examples which the world can emulate. Specific to the question on, you know, how is it helping women empowerment? There are multiple case studies and situations where, let's say women were being used as labor in rural areas. As a compensation, the women were getting paid in cash. Many a times the cash was not even reaching the family in full. There would be people in between who would extract a part of the cash. And whatever cash would reach the family, it would not reach the women, it would actually reach someone else in the family. Now the situation has completely changed, because the money is flowing directly into the account of the women. Now, the level of empowerment that it is creating, when you go in the village, when you interact with women population over there, the difference that you find now, and you ask any one of those, whether it is through these accounts or through some livelihood interventions that have happened, through organizations, what they say is now we are able to decide for ourselves what we want to do. We don't have to borrow money from our husband. Now, that's a huge change. Sitting in an urban area or a metro location, we may not understand that. But for the women in the village, it's a huge change of what is transforming in their life. Genuinely speaking, it's a complete transformation which is happening. I'm not saying it's the end of the story or we have reached there. Maybe we have just covered 10% of the distance or 15% of the distance. But it's a journey that we are moving in the right direction. And, this is something that we need to support. We need to carry on this journey. And if the same thing continues, I think it's going to be a remarkable change in the days ahead. And indeed, it will be development which will be women-led then.
Okay, thank you for that, Anuj. So I'm conscious of time. I think I have about 4 minutes left. So I'm going to invite Suzanne for 2 minutes and then Kathy for 2 minutes to close our session this morning. So Suzanne, over to you.
To promote more women leaders. Of course, it's not an easy answer, but I would say when we talk about the well-educated or the ones who are more vulnerable, I think it's about how we see women in work life in India. And if we could, and it's not easy, but if we could change and make it more respectful, encouraged, appreciated, to find role models that are women leaders and the benefit of actually the family promoting their women to work, I think that would be a huge shift. Because whether, as I said, well-educated, sometimes it's the family holding back, as it's not always seen as a good thing that the woman is working. So I think we can all influence that. On the bank account, I also have a lot of energy because we have seen the benefit of this. So when we work with suppliers, we have a code of conduct called IKEA Way of Doing Business. Part of that is to provide bank accounts to the workers. Part of that is to encourage gender diversity by the supplier base that we have. And we see the benefit it has. And when I go back to myself, I think we can all do something. So my domestic help, she always wanted to have the cash in hand. And I said, you need a bank account. It didn't come so well. After some time, she was convinced. We opened. And in the end, we have a compromise. So a bit she gets in cash because she believes in that, but the most she gets in her bank account. So I think we can all drive the change in the society in our capacity as leaders in business, but also in our private life.
Thank you for that. And can I give you just a quick final remark from Kathy? Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to be super quick then. Maybe also to kind of reply to the questions from the audience. Of course, this is multifactorial, but one thing that hasn't been named was about the importance of increasing access to managerial functions for women. I think it's a very important point. After all, we're in a panel that is named Women-Led Development, so words mean something, they have to mean something, it's not a rhetorical question. So we need to increase access, women's access to managerial functions. That's important, what I mentioned, responsible, gender procurement. But the other thing that will also help will have to be like good, sustainable trade policies. And we've seen that lately there were some progress there, and it created lots of new jobs, especially in exporting industries, and many of these jobs were taken out by women. So it creates more opportunities for women to grow. It's really important. I'm really hoping that all the discussion we're having now, the discussions we had at the B20, are not just like discussion, not the same way I don't want business to just approach this topic as a tick box exercise. I wouldn't want us to approach this topic as like just a pure philosophical discussion. My hope for the outcome of the B20 discussions, the G20, is that it actually drive change on the ground, so that real impact, and that it will only be possible if there is a genuine commitment. And coming back to your question about data, how to measure impact, that's super important. We need to be in a position to measure impact, and to do that, that means that we have to change our approach in how we collect data, and be also, there are indicators. There are gender pay gap indicators. There are indicators about how many, all the questions you ask at the beginning, there are good indicators of how inclusive a company, a business can be. And if you start collecting this data, then you will be able to see that impact. Maybe not the first year, because you have to build some numbers before you can compare them, right? But after a couple of years, you will be able to see a concrete difference, and I think that's what really matters in the end.
Okay, so thank you very much. And please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists for this fascinating conversation. I look forward to hopefully seeing some of these recommendations reflected in the communique as well. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this we conclude the first session of the Day 2 of 18 Sustainability Summit. Our sincere gratitude to our distinguished speakers for their enlightening discourse. I request all the speakers to kindly gather for a group photograph.